from Estonia, who will give us the presentation.
So, from Elis Pärn, I'm sorry to maybe wrongly pronounce your surname. So, from University of Tartu, and she will speak about wooden manor houses. So you will be able to talk between yourselves. So the stage is yours.
Thank you. Perhaps I should start off by saying that the situation in Estonia is the same. The majority of wooden houses are falling apart, although we still have really well restored buildings. And as I have already spoken with some of you here, there are village communities, if one can say so. That means that the local communities are rediscovering their wooden houses, and sometimes there are certain surprises, like paintings coming out behind the wallpapers, or clay that was used in the interiors. So this is a type of building that we need to protect more. But the question is, how can we do it? Where should we start? Should we start with should we start talking about this general public, or should we do some more research first? But both are equally important, but I would say that first and foremost is the research aspect that is going to give us answers to why wood as a material is important in this region. And I can say that we only have one book written about this topic, about the 17th century manor houses, but that was in 1971, which was decades ago. And after the rediscovery of the manor houses in Estonia, which was around 1970s, that was the time when we had the inventory of the manor houses, and this meant that all of the manorial ensembles in Estonia were written down. People were driving around the country, taking photos of everything, so we have this massive amount of data from that time. And of course afterwards new books were being written about this topic, but naturally the first and foremost intention went to stone buildings. So no one was researching manor houses until 2018, when I started with this topic with a fellow bachelor student. So we made our first conclusions, which was that at the beginning of the 20th century we had around 500 wooden houses, which was half of the manor houses altogether in Estonia. But my master's thesis actually proved that wood continued to play a dominant role in the building practice until the middle of the 19th century. So this is how dominant wood was in the building practices in Estonia as well. And we just heard about Lithuania. And now that I have spent the last 3 years in my doctoral studies, I've heard from other regions as well that, for example, in Norway, how widespread wooden houses were, and this also comes from Sweden and Finland, so this is exactly something we need to start talking about more. And I am continuing with the architectural analysis because I think the broader questions are a little bit too difficult to answer at this stage. So today I'm going to be speaking about these ideas. And after hearing Dale's presentation, I really think that I should have included more information about the development of the building type, which is not something that I planned, but here you can see how the changes come. And when we talk about the beginning of the 18th century, we still see the influences from the Swedish era, which means that the buildings are rather small. There is a central chimney in the middle of the building, around which all of the rooms arrange. And the newest research from my professor proves that we also had bigger houses, so this was kind of like a typical type, but at the end we still don't know because we don't have much data from the 17th century. But at the beginning of the 18th century, this building type stayed, and after the Great Northern War, we see that the influences of style start to come in the building practices, but more changes come in the middle of the 18th century when the Baltic lands, Estonia and Livonia, are really strongly connected to the German lands, and new builders come, all sorts of carpenters and so on. Of course, the landlords themselves start to travel, so they bring their new ideas to the Baltics. And we cannot forget about architectural literature, which I'm now going to speak about, but I am focusing on the German architectural tradition, because these books were the most well spread, and this is what we have most in our libraries, and so I have done a lot of research on this, and I will give you some examples later. But my first question in my doctoral thesis is what are the Germans writing about wood? As we all just heard, this is a really interesting topic, and I should, I guess, start out by saying that the most important theorist in German architectural theory is Nicholas Goldman. He actually didn't manage to publish his notes, and this was made by Leonhard Sturm at the beginning of the 18th century. He took his notes, and he first had the one that we can see here on the slide, and afterwards he started to publish separate parts of the topics he was speaking about. And in it, Goldman said that we need to avoid wood because the buildings can burn down. Makes sense. But this doesn't give us much idea what the Germans think when they think about the word wood or a wooden house. And here we can see that as the time goes on, clearer meanings come. And already in 1797 we can understand from Ceder's lexicon that he means by wood a half-timbered building. So a log house is not something that the Germans are writing about. And the next author that is also really well used is Johann Friedrich Bette, and he has his handbook where he first complains how hard it is to read Goldman's work. No one understands it. Everyone needs clearer instructions. But he also has half-timbered houses in his book, in the countryside as well, and also stone, so he doesn't make any judgments. He just states that this is whatever your problem is, this is what you can use. And the first comment on log houses comes from 1751 by Lawrence David Succo, and here we can see that he keeps repeating that houses built entirely of wood are common in areas with exceptionally cold weather, or whereas wood is abundant. And here he mentions the regions, which is Russia, Sweden, the Black Forest, and other mountainous regions. But he doesn't really have a clear understanding what a log house is, because he mentions that the way that the log houses are built, that means that they are less likely to burn down, which I'm not sure if it's correct. maybe some of you have other comments on that later. But in the 70s, we can see that there are really different opinions about log houses. Johan Keferstein here mentions that they are not warm. But another comment from Johan Georg Krunitz, he keeps mentioning that the rooms are clean, smooth, and also warm. And they are used where half-timbered buildings are considered too cold. So what do you know? The Germans have a really interesting fear that comes in the middle of the 18th century. They fear that they are going to run out of wood. There's like a huge panic that if we don't start using other materials now, we won't have anything left in the future. But it turns out this is not a problem everywhere. And at the end of the 18th century, Friedrich Christian Schmidt mentions that using wood or stone depends on the region. Because whereas forest, it makes sense to use the wood. But in Prussia, in general, at the end of the 18th century, the saving of timber becomes a huge topic as well. And David Killy, who is really a well-known author, he starts to popularize a method which is called pisé, which is a construction of tamped clay. And he recommends using it in building practices. The only illustration of an actual log house is the one that I have found from the handbook of Franz Ludwig von Gangren. And this is a really interesting character because he actually travels to Russia at the call of Catherine the Great, and he lives the rest of his life in Russia. He was connected to the what's it called? The mountain construction questions and mineralogy. So his interest is actually with the natural resources mostly, but he also is a 18th century man, which means that his interests are all over the place, including architecture. And he has built houses near Frankfurt. And one of his most beautiful ensembles that he has created is Wilhelmsbad. It's like a spa complex. I haven't managed to visit it last year. It was truly really well designed, so he was a man who knew what he was doing. But he's the first one who mentions that the buildings must be adapted to their climate. So in cold countries, the buildings must be warm, and vice versa. He could have as well gained his knowledge from architectural handbooks, the other ones that he owned. The two that I have here on the right are held at the library at the University of Tartu. And here we can see his name is written on the books. The magazine that we see on the right was really popular at the end of the 18th century, sorry. And Gottfried Huth actually introduces a really long text about the tradition of log houses based on a text that was translated into German in 1749. So the question is, was the Swedish guy's text known at the time? Who knows? In some regions, most likely. But this is how the knowledge of log houses really comes into architectural theory. And at the turn of the century, of course, we can see that the Vitruvius authority becomes to be questioned. The first step in it is Roger's essay on architecture, where he introduces the concept of the rustic hut. And around the same time, Carlo Lodoli brings in the idea that each material should have their own way of building, but this idea doesn't really get anywhere. In Germany, there was a review of his ideas which stated like, this is too crazy right now, like this is not going to be happening. But at the same time, at the beginning of the 19th century, we can see from the professor at the, where was he? In Berlin, art history professor Elis Pärn. He writes his ideas and publishes them based on his lecture notes, and here we can see that for him it doesn't even matter anymore whether it is wood or stone. The example should be the way that the Greek built their houses. So to me, this gives wood as a material a more equal footing, I would say. But of course, wood has its own architectural building style, or it gets its own building style around the middle of the 19th century, where vernacular architecture in Switzerland comes to question. So that's how the approaches are changing over the 18th century. Manor as a building type is also something that I have followed a little bit, and here we can see that already Leonhard Sturm brings in the central, or the most typical building type that we see in this Baltic region. And this is also being followed in other architectural texts as well. And around the middle of the 18th century, Johann Käferstein, for example, states that this should be something that is built in the city and also in the countryside. But around the same time, more attention is given to manor as a whole, how to build it. Sturm already says that how to build a manor, we get this information from household books, Hausvaterliteratur. But he also mentions that this is too complicated to understand. So around the middle of the 18th century, this idea picks up, and a lot of the architects and theorists really give this topic much effort, and more, of course, in Prussia, where this really takes off. But at the same time, as I said, we can see that the question of the landscape comes into question. And for example, Friedrich Christian Schmidt says that sometimes the view of a beautiful garden is more impressive, sometimes a hobby or a necessity makes looking out between the chickens and lambs more enjoyable, just as distant, stunning landscape can add more value to the room on the right, similar to the one on the left. So this is a good idea what was happening at that time. But at the end of the 18th century, manor is something that dominates. I don't know if I can say dominate, but it really takes off at this time in architectural handbooks. Magazines are printed, this is really popular everywhere, but at the same time the Germans are tired of the influence of the French, so they are really starting to say that we should get rid of it, we should start inventing something ourselves, and they really start introducing the ideas of the British. But at the same time, again, we can see all sorts of crazy ideas happening in many different magazines, so the ideas are just all over the place, I would say. In Estonia, as I said, we have so many publications from this era, and these books were sold in the bookstores. Here is an example that I have found, but I also have found other ones. Everything new that was being published, we had it. And we can also ask here how many or which are the authors that we have. This is hard to answer because our biggest libraries, they don't really have a clear overview of what they have in the basement. And 2 years ago I was scanning through the library in Tartu, And at one point, one of the workers told me, we should just end it now. You should have some clear overview already what you have, because finding out everything seems like an impossible task. And we know for a fact that a lot of these books were in the libraries of our local landlords, but we don't really have many archival sources that prove that. We can mostly prove it based on existing books. And one of my most interesting finds is from Hiiu-Suuremõisa, which we heard about today. And I found over 60 books from this manor and from this one specific owner, and he had almost half of those connected to building practices, which is in a way logical because he had many different workshops where they built, for example, the staircase in Hiiu-Suuremõisa was actually built by the local Estonians. And there were also Swedish people working there. So everything was really active in Hiiumaa. And they also, Unger Sternberg had an advertisement in the local newspaper. And he said, like, if someone wants to learn a new profession, they should just come here. We don't really have local contributions on the topic of building, which has been published, but the most interesting example is from a local pastor who also traveled here to Estonia, and he really covers everything, but as we can also see, his idea, the best idea that he has is to build a house of bricks. And he gives some dimensions of the walls, but he doesn't really like anything new. For example, like a mansard roof, he's against it. He says this is not for our climate. And if one builds with logs, he says it's important to improve the durability, and the hours of warmth should not build the living room too large or too high. And at the turn of the century, we have some publications from the society that was founded, which focused on the improvement of agricultural conditions, and they give some instructions on architecture as well, but they copy whatever was said. For example, David Gilli's ideas about the tempt clay, but we can also see that one of the landlords, Johan Wilhelm Ludwig von Lutze, publishes his own ideas, and he, of course, concentrates on the economic buildings as well, but he has a really interesting recommendation how to work with stone buildings. And what is published as well is our Johan Wilhelm Krause's lecture notes for the architecture class at the University of Tartu. But in it he combines everything that he teaches in class, so he doesn't really have many original ideas here. And we can ask, how were the ideals adapted? And I would argue that here is where the role of the landlord comes to play. And this is also something that is constantly being repeated in all of the architectural handbooks at the time, that everything should be built according to the landlord's ideas and wishes. So, for example, here we have one of the well-traveled owner who lived in Guiratsi. He has around 6 or 7 estates, and he only built his manor house in this particular spot. And he chose the material which was wood. So the fact that he had traveled around Europe and was in the court of the, in Weimar, he still chose to live in a small building. And at the same time, we have another enlightened man who traveled around Europe as well, and he's building where he lived in the end. And he also had around 6 or 7 estates, so this is the house that he built. It was much simpler, and I think it's connected to him as a person, because his goal at the beginning of the 19th century was to improve the living condition and just the rights of Estonians in general, so his energy went there. And what I want to mention as well is that, of course, how the buildings came about was also connected to the workers, and in Estonia a lot of the local peasants were used. Also the Russians who were just traveling from one manor to the other. The cheap labor was used, but we also had some examples of Germans who were either masoners or carpenters, who we can associate with them being like the main architect of the house, although their profession was technically something else. And I would say that the role of the landlord continues to the middle half of the 19th century. Because around this time we see a strong influence of the Russian, the architects who were working for the Russian court come into Estonia, and a lot of stone buildings are being erected by them. But at the same time, that doesn't usually happen in wooden architecture. So yeah, I would emphasize the role of the landlord up until this point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. From the pictures I saw the audience took, I think we are really looking forward for the paper to be written down and send us as soon as possible, and we will publish as an article. So work on it, because really it was lots of attention, all focus was on you. So very, very much thank you for the presentation. The audience, I think, already have some questions, or at least reflections. Mr. Wilke.
Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. During my own PhD thesis, I researched French architectural theory, and reading that, I found out it is always very important to get to know whether the person writing actually practices as an architect or not. This is one question to look on the material that is written down, and I also found out that much was just written from another source, so even whole sentences taken, actually it's like a paste and copy in some points. So I tried to rule those out to get the bigger or better view of the new ideas in the material. And I think that, I don't know whether this is your approach, so this is the one question on the theoretical aspect of your text. And the other is, I missed the Swedish architect and publisher Carl Lindblad, who published in the middle of the 18th century, 50s, 60s, and he had a huge output, and he influenced, at least in Sweden and Finland, it's all over. And as this area has been Swedish at some point, I can't remember precisely the history of this area, I'm sorry. So I was asking whether this influence also is, because the example of humor you mentioned, it's strongly connected to Sweden with one of the owners, the actual builder, Eva de la Gardie, sorry. No, her name is Eva Maria, sorry. So there is a Swedish connection, and many families married into Swedish or Finnish families, which was actually Swedish at that time in the 18th century. So, okay. Enough talked of me. I hope you get the questions.
We don't